What does it take to transition from being an athlete and to working with them instead? And how can women in the sports industry take the next step? And what is the key when you're negotiating a contract? Hi, and welcome to another fresh episode with Sport Views podcast. For those who are not new to taking part of this podcast, you know my name, Jacob Wickestall. But for those who are new for this podcast, I'm the host of the Sport Views podcast, a podcast where we interview new perspectives that you never heard before. And we dive into interesting conversations with unique people and get to know their stories from the sports world. Basically, we take through an exciting journey behind the sports front stage. And we do this third season together with our collaboration partner, Sport Idealisten, the job platform only for the sport industry. Find your dream job or dream candidate today. Head over to sportidealisten.com to learn more. And now, let me introduce you to today's guest. Alex Sinatra grew up as a gymnast and transitioned from being an athlete to working with them. She has doubled the bachelor's degree in marketing and law and has been a counsel for different sport businesses and teams. Today, she is the CEO and founder of Your Potential for Everything, a strategic sports consulting business specializing in helping women and women-owned businesses in the sports and esports industries to gain clarity, confidence, and grow their businesses. And if you want to craft innovative and proactive plans in the sport industry and want to get great negotiation tips, then you better sit down now and be ready to take notes when we talk with Alex Sinatra. So with that said, I would like to welcome Alex Sinatra to the Sport Views podcast. Hi, Alex. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast.
Well, happy to have you here. And as probably people understand already, we do this virtually, but I'm very thankful for you taking the time since we are in different time zones. For me, it's good to having you on and really looking forward to this conversation because you have an interesting stories to be said to share for our audience. So looking forward to it.
Yes, I'm really excited too, and thank you for interviewing me right now. I know it's late where you are, later where you are. So thank you for accommodating my time zone, and I'm excited to provide some insight to your listeners about what it is that I do and how they can get involved in the industry as well.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, even though I made a presentation about you, I'm always curious asking the question of how would you present yourself? Because usually there's like people introduce them, but how would you introduce yourself?
So it depends on who I'm speaking to. Because I'm a multipotentialite or a Renaissance person, I'm a Jill of all trades, someone who does a lot of different things. So if I'm speaking to attorneys, then I present myself as a sports attorney first. And then I'll say I'm an entrepreneur as well and an author. If I'm speaking to people in the sports industry that are not attorneys, I'll say I'm a sports business consultant, former athlete, right? So it really depends on who I'm speaking to because I'm all of those things. I don't like to put myself in a box generally, but if I'm speaking to a specific group of people, then I'll highlight the areas that might be most pertinent for them to know.
And if we're going back to what you just started with saying with the multipotentialite, for those that doesn't really understand the word, can you briefly try to explain it a little bit more?
Yes. So back in the day, right, back in the 1600s, 1700s, there were people called Renaissance people. You had to learn a lot of different things. You needed to know how to understand the law and to paint and to dance and to read and to write, all of those different things. And so now, centuries and centuries later, people have all different names for this. You could be a Jack or Jill of all trades. You could be a multipotentialite. You could be an expert generalist. So it's someone who is talented or skilled in multiple areas that seem disparate or different, and they somehow are able to do all of them either concurrently at the same time or after each other. And so for me, I have a degree in business, like you said, and I have a license to practice law as well, but I'm also an entrepreneur. So for me, when I am problem solving, I'm able to put on all those different hats and look at problems and issues in a very unique perspective, so that the problem solving that I do is very bespoke. It's very unique. And I love that, because I've always loved to do many different things. I get bored if I'm doing just one thing all the time. So the fact that I am able to do multiple things really helps my clients, but it also helps me stay engaged in what I'm doing and to live a very happy life.
Yeah, I can recognize myself into what you're saying with doing things that you love to do, and don't take it for granted that you can only do one thing. You can actually do more. I guess it's all about planning, and I guess that's something that you have taught yourself throughout the years as well. But to get further down into that direction, like, how did you end up doing multiple things? Was it that suddenly you had said yes to different tasks that you were supposed to do, and then you realized, like, hey, I'm actually doing separate things? Or how would you say you started to discover the joy of doing more things than one?
Probably when I was little, I figured this out. I didn't truly grasp what it was, but I like to do multiple things. So when I was little, I would create little objects and I would try to sell them, right? So I was a little hustler, a little entrepreneur when I was a child, but I also was a very competitive gymnast as well. But I also rode horses and competed in rodeo. But then I also had parents who were from a big city, but I lived out in the country, right? So I had many different things that were happening in my life that were on completely different ends of the spectrum. I would have a basketball player from the Netherlands in my house for Christmas one Christmas, and then I would have a basketball player from Panama at my house for Thanksgiving. So for me, I always did a lot of different things, and my parents were very adamant about introducing me to different perspectives and different ideas. And my father is also this way. So my father was in a motorcycle gang. He was also a pastor for a church. He was also a cowboy in Montana. He's also an author now, and he wrote a book that's been published. So it was not something that was unfamiliar to me. I was nurtured in this way to where I didn't have to just be one thing in my life. If I wanted to do multiple things, that was fine. The only thing my parents told me in that regard is, if you commit to something for a certain amount of time, then keep your commitment. That's the only thing they said. You know, if you committed to 3 months doing something, then you stay for those 3 months, whether you like it or not, and then you move on, right? So for me, when I was little, I started to recognize that it's okay to be multiple things. And I started gravitating toward stories of people who did a lot of different things. The Michelangelos, the Leonardo da Vinci's, right? Those type of people, the Margaret Thatchers, all of these very interesting and unique and successful people in history. Most of them had multiple interests, and those multiple interests informed them so greatly in what they were doing. So I appreciated that and I ran with it.
Yeah, so it sounds like a good mix of things that you could actually grow up with, and taking lessons learned from just having additional people in the house, I guess,
Yeah.
as well, and not even just from the same country. That must have been, I guess, scary in the first place. Or, I mean, with having a Dutch person, I guess, would be scary. I guess that you were quite young when this was happening.
It wasn't scary for me because I loved learning about new things. I had a subscription to Kids National Geographic. So I always was, and National Geographic is a magazine that talks about all different countries in the world. And so the kids version of that was like really cool games that they played in different countries and what the kids were like there. So for me, this was like my National Geographic magazine coming to life, right? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I read about the Netherlands. You guys have wooden shoes and you have tulips, and tell me about that, right? Or the man from Panama, I'd say, oh, like, what type of food do you eat in Panama? And is your mother from Northern Panama or Southern Panama, right? So I was very excited about that. And I always grew up in sport as well. And so they were basketball players that were coming to stay with us. So I loved it. It was like I had brothers from all these different countries. And, you know, the guy from the Netherlands was 7 feet tall. So I was more scared of how tall he was than what country he came from. Because I'm little as well. I'm very short. So he was very, very tall, especially as a child.
Yeah, I can imagine they are quite tall, the Dutch people, for sure. Yeah. But so like coming into like your sort of experience with sports, you mentioned the gymnast, but also rodeo. Well, did you feel any sort of difference between those sports when it comes to being in a team or like individual, as well as I don't know, how much time did you spend on those sports, and was that from your parents that introduced you to those, or was it friends?
So gymnastics, my parents put me in gymnastics because I was just interested in it. I saw it on TV. I had a best friend who did it. And then the rodeo, since my dad was a cowboy and I grew up on a ranch or a farm in the middle of nowhere, we had horses, we had cattle, we had goats, we had cats, we had dogs, we had chickens, we had everything. So for me, it was natural to ride horses. And then because a lot of people in that community also then did rodeo, because that's the natural extension of always riding horses, you're going to compete somehow. So I competed with it, but I didn't really take it as seriously as I did gymnastics. I'm a very skilled rider. I mean, I'm not going to brag, but I am a very skilled rider. I've been riding since I was very young, and I was good at it. I loved my horses. I was great at training horses, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do for a living. And I didn't really want to do it at a very highly competitive level. So it was just for fun for me. But gymnastics was the opposite. I really wanted to be very good at it. I was very competitive. I enjoyed it a lot, even though it's quite scary. So for me, gymnastics, I spent much more time on than I did rodeo and competing in rodeo. And I probably should have stuck with rodeo because gymnastics is very dangerous. I probably would not have gotten as injured as I did if I just stuck with rodeo. So I guess lesson learned there, but gymnastics taught me a lot of skills, and it's been very helpful throughout the years.
Yeah, and curious, just to pick up the last with the rodeo thing, as you're saying, you were not keen to put in that much time, I guess, that was required at a certain age. Is there sort of any system for people that don't want to do like, you know, put in the whole week for that sort of sport? Or is it more like, okay, you're going into a sport and then you have to put in all the effort to it? Or is there sort of any backup, or like, you know, those that just want to have fun 1 hour a week?
Yeah.
Was that anything for you back then?
Yeah, so there's recreational sport here. Yeah, so with rodeo, I did it recreationally. So I would go and I would compete in rodeos and things like that. But I mean, I wasn't trying to do well. I was just doing it for fun, hanging out with my friends, bonding with my horse, bonding with my father because he was also there. So there are rodeos where you're doing it professionally, and you have to have a certain score and a certain time and everything to compete in it, like professional sport. Those are televised. They're really big, you know, it's a big deal. But there are also local rodeos that are just for fun, or there are ones that are literally just for fun. Like you're really a child and you go there just to have fun and just to learn skills. So for me, I did recreational. With gymnastics, at first it was recreational, and then they saw that I had talent. And so they moved me into the track that was competitive. And so I started doing competitive gymnastics when I was, I don't know, 8 years old. So I was much older than most gymnasts. Most gymnasts start when they're 3 or 4. I started when I was 7, but I moved into the competitive arena when I was maybe 8. So about a year into it, they recognized that I had some talent and some skill. So they moved me into that. And then I did that all the time. So I pretty much transitioned from doing some gymnastics and some rodeo into full-time gymnastics, which I don't know, maybe I should have done more sports when I was younger, because studies show that if you don't specialize young, that's actually better for you because you won't burn out. It's better to kind of be a generalist in sport up until a certain age and then to pick a specific sport, kind of like Roger Federer versus Tiger Woods. Roger Federer did a bunch of different things before he decided that tennis was his sport. Tiger Woods decided he was just going to do golf his whole life, which is fine. They're both highly successful. However, the Tiger Woods stories are very less likely than the Roger Federer stories. There are more elite athletes that take the Roger Federer path than there are that take the Tiger Woods path. Right. So for me, maybe I should have been more Roger Federer and less Tiger Woods.
Well, it's good that you like, explaining them as well. And the story, I've heard this as well. And I know there's tons of great athletes out there that have, been doing several sports for a long time in their teenager years as well. But that's, it's a topic that is very discussable in Sweden, especially when it comes to, okay, how do we stress the youth or not? Are we allowing them to do whatever sports they would like to do? Because there's a lot of sports that would like to keep the players, because that becomes the discussion. It's not people anymore, it's like players, but they're still kids. And then I want to have you in my football team, not to, that you spend any more time at somewhere else. So it's been a discussion the last few years. And that's why it's interesting to also hear how it was for you and in your surrounding, because I think it's important for kids to have their own rights. So they I want to do 3 sports. Well, sure, you do it, but then you have to plan and all of those. But they should be, everyone should be supportive of try out as many sports you can. But I know gymnastics could be, like you mentioned yourself, it could be a challenge for the body in the end, because it's a lot of different accidents that's going on in the younger ages of gymnasts, because it's a sport where you are quite young when you are on the top level as well.
Yes.
So how did you feel how long did you compete and why did you stop?
Well, I stopped competing at a competitive level because I fractured my spine, actually. And so I was very scared after that. I started to have a little fear, which is one of the reasons why I probably got injured. And so I stopped doing gymnastics at a competitive age, maybe 6 years into it, something like that, 6 years at the highly competitive level. And I broke my back and I said, this is not worth it. My doctor said, don't do it anymore. You're going to hurt yourself. You already broke your foot. You hurt your shoulder. You broke your back. You should stop, And at that point I was 11, 12, 13, something like that. So at that age, I wasn't high enough for me to justify it. I could have gone a few levels higher, probably gone to college on a scholarship, something like that, if I had kept working on it. But it wasn't worth it. I fractured my spine. I didn't want to be paralyzed, So I stopped doing it. I went to high school. I did basketball, track and field, cross country, volleyball, swimming. I did all the different sports, had a lot of fun, stayed very fit. Gymnastics helped me in all of those because I was quick, but I also had endurance, but I had upper body strength, lower body strength, body awareness, right? Gymnastics really helped me with a lot of that. I understood time management and organization because when I was doing gymnastics, I was doing it 6 days a week and I had to organize my schoolwork and my gymnastics schedule and eating, and I didn't have a social life, right? So I understood how to balance a lot of different things and to plan my day and my life. And I was decent at volleyball. I had a very high vertical for someone as short as I was. I was blocking people at the net. I'm only 5'4". So the fact that I could get above the net up to my elbows is pretty good, right? So I had a high vertical. I did really great in hurdles. I did 300 meter and 100 meter hurdles. I was very good at that. And then I got to college and I really missed competing because I didn't go to school on any sort of scholarship. I didn't do gymnastics or any sport in college, but I wanted to do something. And so I saw that they had a gymnastics team at the school that I went to, and it was not a highly competitive level, but they were highly decorated for the league that they were in. And so I was like, oh, maybe I'll do this. And so I did. And I competed for 1 year, and then I fractured my spine again. And so then I was on the team for a year in a back brace, right? And then one of my friends was on the diving team there, and he was scholarshiped, full scholarship. And he said, maybe you can transition to diving and walk onto our diving team and be a diver here. I'm like, okay, let me try that. And so over the summer, I, did my rehab and everything, my back healed. And I did diving for a summer, and I hated it. It was frightening, terrifying, so terrifying to me. And I said, you know what? I don't need to do a sport in college. I think I'm okay.
Why was it terrifying?
It was so scary because you're so high, right? So if you're doing platform, you're very high. If you're doing springboard, it pushes you up really high into the air. And gymnastics, you get high, like for the normal person, you're high in the air on bars or something like that. But diving, you're much, much higher. Right.
You discovered you were not really keen to go on high.
Like heights, and you have to land head first. So in gymnastics, if you're landing head first, you're going to hurt yourself. You're going to die. Right. But in diving, they're like, oh no, your head has to go first. So my body didn't understand that.
It's like the complete opposite. Yeah.
My feet need to land first. And my coach kept saying, Alex, you have to dive in. Like, I don't want to dive in. So that didn't last very long, but I learned a lot about diving. So I have a lot of respect for divers. And my friend who said that I should walk on the team, he was in the Olympics twice. So that was really cool. I got to be friends with him, and see him compete in the Olympics. So it was worth it, but I definitely do not want to be a diver.
I wonder if there's anyone that aren't doing gymnastic and diving. Because it's like you're saying, it feels like it's the opposite of how you should behave with your body.
There's a lot of people who transition from gymnastics to diving because the twisting and the flipping, you don't have to be taught that. You just have to be taught how to enter the water, but you understand the body shapes. So if you're not afraid of heights, then diving would be a good transition for a gymnast. Yeah. But I'm a little too afraid of the height. Yeah.
Yeah, I got it. But so going through this whole sort of journey from, being very active within different, now you mentioned it. I mean, now you've been active through many different sports later on in your youth as well. But transition, and then from after all of this, you realize now you can't really practice any sort of sport. Did you also realize that sometime you need to stay in this like sport industry, if we put it like that?
Yes, since I had been in sports since I was very young, and my entire family was in sports, and I had athletes coming in and out of my house all the time, I knew that I wanted to stay in sport. And in college, I recognized that there are a lot of athletes who are going to go professional after college, but they were not represented well by their agents. And so I thought maybe I'll go to law school and be an agent. I saw the movie Jerry Maguire. That's about Lee Steinberg's life. I got to meet Lee Steinberg. I got to meet someone that he worked with as well. And I thought, wow, that'd be really cool to be an agent. So I went to law school. I was an intern with some agents, NBA and NFL. I did not like it. The agents I worked with were fantastic, but the general idea of agency, I wasn't a fan. And so I spoke with one of my mentors, and he said, Alex, you can be an attorney for a sports team or a league or a big company that has sports related properties. You can be an attorney for an arena. And I hadn't thought about that. And so I said, okay, I'll keep studying law. I will keep taking classes that will help me do that type of law and practice that type of law. And so I did that, and I decided that after law school, I wanted to work for a sports team or a league or something like that. And I got the opportunity to work for a family actually that owns sports teams. And so I was able to do work for them with the possibility that I could do sports law work. So they had a lot of other legal work that they needed done because they're a very prominent family. They have a lot of assets. They have a lot of different things that they own. And so they needed some help. And the head attorney for that family said, if there's sports work that you can work on, I'll try to let you work on it. And so for me, that was enough. The possibility that I could work in sport, I took the position. It was a project position. So it was for a short period of time. As long as they needed me, I would work for them. And so I did get to do some sports work for them, which was really nice, really fun. Got that on my resume. So that was kind of my first job, actual real job where I was getting paid in the world of sport. And it was really a really great experience.
And that's interesting when you say, I think this is I guess you have heard it yourself and you did it yourself when like sports agent, that's the first thing you think about. That, you know, you represent an athlete or several, and that's it. Like what did you imagine the job as a sport agent to be like, and what was it that you didn't like about it when you actually was there?
Yes. So for me, I'm a very empathetic person, and I like to fight for people when I think they're being taken advantage of. So for me, being a Jerry Maguire made sense. I'd be fighting for the athletes. I'd be negotiating deals. I'm a very talented and skilled negotiator. And so I thought, oh, that'd be fantastic. I'd be so good at it. But I didn't recognize that the industry of sports agency is a little shady and a little corrupt, and that there are a lot of agents who are doing phenomenal work in the industry for their athletes, but there are a ton more agents that are not doing good work for their athletes. And I didn't want to have to consistently fight through getting clients and having to prove to them that I was not going to take advantage of them. It was just the time and effort that it would have taken for me to make a name for myself in the sports agency industry. It was just not the amount of time that I was willing to devote to that, on top of the fact that I would be having to try to get clients from people who were lying to them about things. So for me, I thought, you know, I want to be able to protect athletes, but maybe there's a different way that I can go about doing that, because I like the skills that you need to be a good agent. I have those skills and I like utilizing them, but I didn't want to be an official agent and have to be licensed by the different leagues and then have to also fight for clients. I wanted clients to come to me because they knew my reputation, as opposed to going out there and having to fight to get clients.
Yeah, no, I think it's cool to hear like your sort of mission there, that you actually want to, yeah, you know, improve the justice of athletes in general, and that you thought that this is a good way to actually step in and improve sort of like the community for and the atmosphere of the athlete's career, which is amazing. Me myself was actually thinking the same when I was living in the States before, but I never took the step myself. So I guess I was sort of in the same sort of road like you were when you then turned and had another direction. But you mentioned a mentor in that space. Did you have a mentor for a long time before? How did you end up having the mentor that helped you guide you through to the next step?
Yes. So my father put me in contact with people who knew agents. And so that's how I got those internships. And so they kind of guided me on what the world of agency is about. This is what it looks like. And so I interned with them. But then when I was in law school, my second year, there was a sports law class that I could take, specifically dedicated to sports and the law, cases in sports law, arbitration, negotiation, mediation, all the skills that you might need to work in sport. And the professor of that is a sports attorney. And so he kind of took me under his wing. After I showed him I was very serious, I put forth a lot of effort. I got the highest grade in his class. I put together the sports law symposium, the first annual sports law symposium at the school. After I put forth all that effort and I showed him that I was serious and I was a hard worker, that's when he started saying, oh, well, I know this person. Why don't I put you in contact with this? Oh, I know this person. Why don't you send them an email? Right. And so he started showing me the ropes of the industry. And to this day, he's still my mentor. I still talk with him at least once a week. Usually it's multiple times a week. We're looking to do some work together, actually, which is kind of cool. It's a full circle moment for me that my mentor is now becoming a colleague. But for me, it was vital that I had these people around me that I could really trust and that I could go to when I had very important questions. And some of these mentors now I'll go to. When I was working for a professional sports team as the attorney, there were situations that arose that I'd never handled. I'm still a fairly young attorney. And so there are situations that I have never handled before that are fairly common, but I've just never had the opportunity to handle them. And when those arose, I would reach out to them and I'd say, I don't have this document. Can you provide a copy of a document like this so that I can use it? And what would I do in this scenario? Or this happened. What are the best steps? Is there anything I'm missing here? And it was very important in sports in general, but especially in sports law, because usually there's a lot of money on the line. So if you make a mistake, it's not going to bode well for you or your client. So having these people around me that either had the answer or could point me to someone or point me in a direction that had an answer was really very important for my career.
Yeah, and I think it's important as well to understand the sort of key start of this network that you build up now as well, is that you actually showed your interest into the area and that you really want to make sure that the people around you understand how willing you are to do the job and the work in order to take the next step. And obviously it feels like that was why he supported you after a while, that he actually saw that you put in all the energy and effort to be very serious about it. So I'm very happy to hear that sort of like commitment, because I know that there's tons of people as well listening to this, but also in general, like they want to, make something about it, but then sometimes you don't really realize how much you need to put in order to get sort of the help backwards as well. And mentoring or like, having people bouncing ideas, I guess you are a good proof of it as well, that you can actually bounce ideas, or like, you have a sort of a question instead of just, going through your head like, oh, is this right? Is this right? I don't know. Then you can actually bounce it with some people, which I guess is what you're mentioning right now. It's a good investment, but also a good sort of work style to have people bouncing ideas.
Yes, agreed. You have to learn when to ask for help, and asking for help is not weakness. And that's something that everyone should take to heart. If you've done research yourself and you've thought through things yourself, then asking for help is not something that's bad. Asking for help when you've done nothing and you expect other people to do the work for you, that can be seen as bad, right? But if you've done the work and you're coming forth with questions and solutions that are very pointed, that are very specific because you've done the background work, then that's something that is quite flattering actually to people. And you go to them and you say, I've done all this work, but I value your opinion so much. I'd love your advice and your thoughts on how to handle this. And that's how I go to my mentors. I say, I've done this research, I've done XYZ. I don't know the answer here. I think it might be this. Can you please help me with this? Or at least point me in the right direction. I remember recently I had someone reach out to me and they were quoting something and I didn't know what this was from. And I did some research and I was still confused. And so I asked my mentor, could you please point me in the direction of this rule that they're quoting? I can't find this quote unquote rule that they're quoting. And so he sent me the text of the rule. He said, oh, it's here. And I said, oh, thank you. I couldn't find it, And so those types of things, I was humble, and I know that he's providing this information to me because he also respects my work ethic. You can't just decide that you're going to have people help you when you don't put forth the effort, or you're not willing to help them either. A lot of my colleagues and my mentors and the people in the industry that I have in my network, I have provided valuable information to them as well, or I've helped them on projects without asking for compensation or without asking for anything in return, or I provided help to them before I ever needed help from them. So that is also extremely important in any industry, but especially the sports industry, because it is pretty small.
Yeah, and I think seriously, just to like recap in a one sentence what you sort of said with this, which is very, simple but so true. What you mentioned, getting help. Like, there's a difference of getting help when you've done the work or research already, or when you just ask because you don't have the time or energy or effort to do it yourself. And I think that's a good way to really like just take it in there. Help is always good to ask, but make sure you have done the job yourself before, because then you appreciate someone else's opinion about it, which was, it was really good. Well said.
And that's something that I learned by interviews that I watched of Mark Cuban. So Mark Cuban used to be the boss of one of my friends, and they were very, very close. And so he was always telling me things that Mark Cuban told him, right? And so one of the things was that, it's okay to ask for help if you've done your research and you can't figure it out. And so I've always thought that way and done that. And then when I heard that quote, I thought, wow, yeah, that's true. Because when people come to me now and they say, oh, Alex, I can't find this. I'm like, did you like control F, like control find? Because that's all you have to do in your email, or that's all you have to do in the document in order to find it. But they thought their time was so much more valuable than mine, and they didn't try to figure it out. And so I remember I had an intern once who at first she kind of wouldn't do all the research herself. And it was because she'd never been taught that. She'd been taught asking for help is a good idea, which it is. But I told her, I said, listen, ask me for help all day long, but provide a solution to me or an answer to me when you come and ask me for help. Say, I have found that it might be this, but I don't think that's right. That's fantastic. I managed a whole team in India and I like reworked their working structure based around that concept. Come to me with a solution or an answer and the question. If your answer or solution is wrong, there's no problem. That's perfectly fine, but you tried. So for me, it's all about the effort behind it. And that is what my mentor showed me. He never told me that, but that's what he showed me as well. You put forth the effort, I'll provide you the context and the insider information of how the sports industry works.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And, you know, you've already mentioned it in this conversation, and also with due to like your background with the law studies as well. Negotiation in general, it feels like, you know, if unless you have sort of trained up that sort of skill negotiating or you've done your studies, it's a daily thing that people end up to, you know, it's always negotiating something. Everything from you doing it with kids, could be, you know, from a sports perspective, could be, you know, kids in a team, the players that are more senior, you're the coach, or you're managing a whole team or an organization. And there are always different ways of like, okay, you want to have your way, you want to have like the best outcome of it. To make it very simple here, what would you say like are 1 to 2 sort of tips when it comes to trying to make the best outcome from your own situation in a negotiation deal?
So negotiation, people a lot of times think it's about who can talk the loudest and who can persuade the most. But negotiation really is about listening and problem solving. So those are my 2 tips. You need to listen more than you're speaking, because the other side is really going to tell you what the problem is. If you let them speak long enough, they're going to tell you what they want. They're going to tell you what the problem is. They're going to tell you how they would like it to be solved. And then if you are listening to them, then you can be the problem solver, which is the second step. So let's solve the problems in the negotiation. If you're an athlete that's negotiating with a team, what does the team want? Let's say, well, they want you to stay for 5 years. Let's say they want you to stay for 5 years because they're building a championship team and you're a cornerstone to that team and they really want you to stay, but they don't have enough money to pay you what you think you could get on the open market, right? So problem solve. Okay, they can't give it to me in cash now, but is it possible that in 2 years they could give me more? Is it possible I could get a bonus? Is it possible they could provide housing for me here? Is it possible that they could provide my wife and family tickets to XYZ? Is it possible they could fly my husband out to, you know? And so there's all these other things that you could think about if you were listening and you were able to be a good problem solver. And that's in your everyday life outside of the sports world as well. If you're negotiating apartment lease, rent for your apartment, if you're negotiating for a car, all of those things, right? Let's say you're negotiating for a car and you're listening to the sales guy and they're saying like, well, you know, this is a hot model and it's going to come off the lot really quickly and yada, yada, yada. Well, if you're listening to him, it sounds like he has a quota that he has to meet. Why is he so interested in getting all these cars off the lot? Why is he so interested in like moving this particular model? It's probably because on August 1st, his sales manager told him that he needed to move X amount of cars in order to get his bonus by the end of the month, right? So if you're a problem solver and you're listening to this person, you're saying, oh, it's probably because he has a quota. Then try to solve that problem. Say, listen, I really want you to meet your quota this month. I really want you to do that. However, the price point that you're providing right now is just not something that I'm able to pay. Is there a way that we can reduce this price? Is there a way that you could make my car upgraded? Is there a way that you could do a year's free worth of maintenance, right? So if you're listening and then trying to problem solve collaboratively, you're probably going to come up with a much better solution than if you just try to hammer the other person into submission. People do not like being told what to do, and they do not like thinking that the solutions that are coming up with aren't their idea. They really want to think that all the great things that happen in negotiation is because of them. Let them think that. That is fine. Take your ego and throw it in the trash. It is perfectly fine if they think that the entire deal was done because they're a magician. Fantastic. You still got what you wanted.
No, that's good. That's good. And especially, I definitely agree when you say, like, listen, and then, try to understand what is actually behind the conversation, and then try to, that I guess that's the challenge on the other end, like, really understand what's the key here and what the person is saying. But being patient, I guess, is a good in those conversations. Like, what is their actually saying, and don't think that you have to put in a quick reply in just 1 second. You can actually breathe a little bit and then get back to sort of the argument or whatever it is in the conversation.
Exactly. And you really want to prepare for negotiations. So not every negotiation you can prepare for, because sometimes they're impromptu and they just kind of pop up and you're in a situation and you think, oh my gosh, I'm in a negotiation. I didn't even realize it, right? But for the negotiations that you might have, so if you're negotiating for a raise or a new job or a contract, your contract is coming up for renewal in 3 months, you can prepare for those negotiations ahead of time. Do your research, look at any statistics that might help you, create documentation that you might present, figure out all the great things that you've done for an organization, whether you're a player, or you're in the front office or in the back office. Come up with all of that information and start preparing your argument, and say things to them like, what would they say if I said X? If I said I wanted a raise, they might come to me and say that we don't have enough money. And then you might say, okay, how would I prepare for that? How would I counter that argument? I might say, well, you realize that I actually, and this is an actual example of an argument that I used back when I was asking for a raise. I said, well, I've gotten over $200,000 worth of earned free advertising for the team through my efforts and my work. So I saved the team $200,000. And I had this many impressions from that $200,000. I also raised $50,000 through XYZ. And neither of those things is my full-time job here. I said, so we do have money, and I would like a part of what I have raised for the team and what I have saved for the team. But I had actual statistics there. I had created an entire set of statistics, basically a slide deck presentation about why I deserve the money, how much money I deserve, how much money I'm actually asking for, right? Because I deserve way more than I'm asking for.
Yeah.
And I figured out what was important for the team. Saving money and making money. Those are two very important things. And also for that particular season, it was about visibility. So they wanted to know, how many people did you get us in front of, and what type of people were they, right? So if you have the time and the luxury of preparing for a negotiation, then you should figure out every objection that they're going to have so that you have an argument, because it's very, very difficult, especially when you're a newbie to negotiation, to think quickly on your feet. So for me, it's a little easier because I have done the work over time and over time. I've been in a lot of negotiations. I've done a lot of negotiations in my head where I played both parties, right? So for me, it's a little bit more flexible for me to adapt to those types of situations than it would be someone who's going in for their 10th negotiation as opposed to their 1,000th, right? So it's very important to do that. But even if you don't have time to prep, you might have 5 minutes before, you might have 10 minutes before, you might have, like you said, the opportunity to pause, right? So if you can practice what the pauses or responses are going to be when you don't know an answer, that's also very helpful, because that can bide you time. If someone says something, well, we can't give you a raise. Okay, what are going to be your responses to that, though? If you don't know that you're in a negotiation for a raise, what's going to be your response? Maybe you say, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. I was expecting that the work that I put forth would indicate that I am due a raise because I'm a very hard worker. I put in X amount of overtime the past month. Can you explain to me a little bit about the reasons behind why you think that I shouldn't get a raise? And then they might say, well, it's been a tough quarter, well, blah, 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 or well, it's not a year that you've been working for us yet. Maybe they're wrong. Maybe their analysis of why you shouldn't get a raise is actually wrong. And you say, well, actually, I started 18 months ago. It's been 1.5 years since I've been here. And they might say, oh, we didn't see that. The documentation that we have is incorrect. You're right. You were hired on this date. You are due a raise. And then you can say something like, that's fantastic. I'd love to get something on the calendar next week so that I can prepare for the discussion, so I can provide everything that you need me to provide. Is there anything in particular that I can provide for you to make this process easier? Right? And you switch it on them, and you didn't prepare for the negotiation at all. You just prepared what your responses to possible questions in life will be. If you don't know what the question is going to be, you don't know you're going to be in a negotiation, you might say something like, that's very interesting. Can you tell me more about that? That literally will work in a work situation, a life situation, any type of situation, a relationship. Your boyfriend says something to you, your girlfriend says something to you. That's very interesting. Can you tell me more about that? That'll work. They might think you're being facetious, so maybe change it up a little bit, but always be preparing for something like that, because you never know when you might get into a negotiation.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I usually do the 5 whys concept when it comes like that. So you said something, then I ask why, and then you start to explain it, and then there's another reason behind that. So then I keep going, and usually about 5 times when you're asking the why, you come on down to the root cause, and then you can, like you said now as well, like if there's still some unclear, then you can say like, let's set up a meeting, and then we both can prepare. On the other hand, just a quick note, but this is also more like a smaller one. If your employer telling you that you've only worked there for 1 year and they don't even know that you've been there for longer, then I would also suggest to look up another place. But because that sounds a little bit rough to not know how long you've been there.
True, but sometimes the people that are doing the interviewing or doing the raises, they might not be your direct superiors. They might just be someone who is told something that's incorrect. They might have read the email incorrect. I agree that if an organization doesn't believe that you are due a raise and you're a very hard worker, that you should probably take your skills somewhere else. But not everybody has the luxury, especially in the sports industry, especially as a sports attorney. There are not a lot of jobs opening all the time. So if you're with an organization and you're in a higher position in the sports industry and they're not willing to give you a raise, maybe they're willing to give you something else though. I've negotiated for non-monetary benefits, spa benefits, housing benefits, those types of things, which also paying for tolls, so toll roads as well. So those things are not necessarily money going into your pocket, but it's saving money from going out of your pocket, right? So that can also be a wonderful thing to be able to negotiate. You might not always be able to get those monetary value from an employer, but you might be able to get a non-monetary benefit that's very, very helpful for you and your family.
Yeah, true that. Well, it feels like we could talk forever, but it was also coming to an end of this. It feels like there's tons of more I would like to ask, but to try to wrap it down in some way, typical question, but what would you say in general, like what is one of the best career advices that you've been given?
It is a very difficult question because I've gotten some superb career advice in my life, especially because I've been in so many different industries and done so many different jobs. But I would say that you can learn something from every experience that you have, whether it's good or bad. And if you're leaving a situation and you haven't learned something from it, that's your fault. That's not the fault of your employer. That's not the fault of your boss. That's not the fault of your colleagues. That's your fault, because you can always learn something from any situation that you've been in If it's a phenomenal work environment, if it's a terrible work environment, you're going to learn something about others and yourself. You might learn how you don't want to be a certain type of manager. Maybe you want to learn how to manage a team better because you did a terrible job, right? For me, I managed a team a year and a half out of law school. I managed a team on another continent, a legal team as a young attorney like that. It was very intimidating at first. I did so much research to be able to be a good manager on that. And I could have just been scared and been the worst manager ever because I say my work never trained me how to do this. My boss never trained me. He's a terrible manager. I could have just blamed everybody else. But instead, I did all the work. I watched a ton of TED Talks. I read a lot of articles. And when I left that organization, the people that I managed said that I was the best manager that they had ever had, which was mind-blowing to me because I had taught myself through Google how to be a manager, right? So if you're leaving a work environment and you haven't learned something, that's your fault.
Yeah, thanks God for Google, right?
Yeah, Google helps me so much. I am never scared to ask Google for help.
No, but I guess that's one of the luckiest thing or the best opportunities we actually have in this world nowadays. That there are so much knowledge and information just ahead of us that we can just use your phone or computer, and then we actually can find so many answers and knowledge within just seconds. So that comes also back to with the whole help thing. Try to look at yourself first. If you don't find it, then say you've done your work, but you couldn't find it, and then ask for help. So I think, coming back to that part as well. But yeah, I definitely agree with what you said there with the career advice of make sure you always bring an experience from every context and every situation you're part of, for sure.
Yes, definitely. And that's what I do with my strategic sports consulting as well. As you said at the very beginning, I work with businesses and individuals within the sports and esports industry. I predominantly work with minorities and women because that's where my heart lies. I really want to help people who have been underrepresented within the industry to rise up. But I also work with men as well. So if there's a guy out there who's a pro athlete, he's like, oh, she only works with women. It's okay. Hit me up. I will also probably work with you after I do an interview to see if you're a correct fit for me. But I do help people build their businesses. I help them negotiate, like you said. I really help them understand how to be the best version of themselves within the industry as well, which can take time. And it really depends on your network. So bring me into your network and I can help you guys.
Yeah. And I guess the whole thing here is just ask. Just ask and see if you can get some help. And that's the first step.
The worst thing someone could say is no, they're not willing to help you. And then you're no worse off now than you were then. Yeah. But now this person might respect you a little more because you asked them. And later on down the road, they might be more willing to help you because they said, well, they had the audacity to ask me. That's pretty courageous. That's pretty bold of them to do that.
True that.
It doesn't hurt you.
No, exactly. And yeah, to wrap up also a little bit what you are doing, you also have your own podcast yourself, as also it's called the similar as your sort of job as well. But for those that, are keen to learn more, because you're having several different conversations in your own podcast with amazing people from different backgrounds and so on. But, what's your sort of his pitch for elevator pitch for your podcast? Like, why should people go ahead and listen, and what's about, to make it brief?
Yes. So everything that I do is housed under your potential for everything. My strategic sports consulting, being able to book a call with me for that. My book series, the same thing, and my podcast. So my podcast and my book series, as you said, runs the gambit of all different sorts of things, from entrepreneurship and esports to networking and understanding how to work from home. The new series is going to be on women in sports and professional athletes as well. And it's about people who want to do more than one thing in their life. So everybody that I interview has done multiple things in their life. Maybe they're a professional athlete, but they also have a business. Maybe they're an attorney for a professional sports team, but they also have been a highly trained violinist. It's people who are Renaissance people, multipotentialites. And it just is out there because I knew that people needed to recognize that you don't have to do one thing in your life. Just because you're asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? Doesn't mean that you have to only ever give one answer. When you're 5 years old, okay, fine. Maybe you only know that you want to be a ballerina and that's all you can see because your mind hasn't fully developed yet, right? But you don't have to have the same dreams and thoughts when you're an adult. You can do a bunch of different things and be happy in all of those industries. So that's what my podcast is about. And that's how Your Potential for Everything, the entire brand, was birthed, because I want people to recognize you don't have to have one answer to the question of what do you want to be when you grow up.
That's good. That's good. It's a good finish as well for the whole show. But the last thing, I will drop this in the show notes, obviously, but how can people connect with you so we can stay in touch?
Yes. So you can go to yourpotentialforeverything.com. And then on Instagram, my handle is @yourpotentialforeverything. And then on Twitter, it's yourpotential4.
Cool. And yeah, if you really want to connect with Alex, which you should after this conversation, because there's so much more as well to figure out here. So just open up the show notes and then you can connect with her there. Well, yeah, like I said, we could go on forever, I think, but we have to also, you have the rest of your day and I have my evening from my time. So, but very, very interesting conversation, and thanks a lot for taking the time once again, Alex. I mean, your story is unique as so many other people, but that's the whole point of this, like what's behind the curtain, so to say, and what's driving people to go further. And in your story, it feels like, you're trying to explore many things, and you also understand that you can do many things, which is incredible. And some of the lessons, just a few to pick up here, is basically do your own research when it comes to getting help from people, but it's always okay to ask, but just make sure you have done it your own way first. Negotiating, listening, and then you start figuring out the answer. And it's also fine to say, let's book a meeting, and then you get more time to do some planning and research for the conversation. And that's just a little bit of the whole conversation here. So yeah, thanks a lot for taking time. If you have anything else, now's the time to bring it up.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you so much for having me. This has been really fascinating. I had a conversation with someone on a podcast in Australia, and now I'm in Sweden. So it's really cool to connect with people in the sports industry and the legal industry that are all around the world. So thank you so much for recognizing that I have a unique story and for letting me share it with your fans.
Yeah, cool. And like I'm trying to say to everyone, instead of like have a great day or whatsoever, I'm trying to put it in this way instead. Create a great day, and I wish you a successful future as well.
Thank you so much. I love that. Yeah, create a good day. I love that. That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, that's the only way we can do it. We have to create it ourselves, But yeah, so this was the whole conversation. And for all the listeners, thanks for being part of this week's episode of the Sport Use podcast. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I've done so far. And it feels like I can probably repeat this session again and again, because there's so many things to take as lessons learned. But before that, would be happy if you would be willing to put a review on the podcast. And especially if you really enjoyed this conversation, why not share it? We use Sport Views Podcast at Instagram as our main source of communication. So hit us up there, suggest guests, suggest questions to bring in. But please share those episodes and make sure more people like you find this place, and discovering more unique people and perspectives in the sports field. And with that said, if you want to find out more about Alex, then you find the show notes. And that's a wrap. So thanks for joining this time, and create a great day. Ciao.
Ciao.